Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I want to first let you know what I'm going to share with you in the hour that I've been given to go over the material. And I understand that you have got a copy of my PowerPoint, and you also have two sort of flow charts, one that's designated straight donations and one that's designated for bargain sales. What I'm going to do is give you an overview of what's going on in the nonprofit world. Then I'm going to walk you through quite a bit of tax law. I'm not trying to make you tax accountants or attorneys this afternoon, but once you've heard it, you will start to put the pieces together on how it will benefit you. Donating real estate is one of the biggest areas to help fund nonprofits in the country. The federal government has purposely set up all of the rules and regulations to benefit you, the nonprofits, if you do it correctly with your donors. And the great chore we have is to educate both sides of the equation and how this works. And once you've been through a couple donations, you'll see it opens up the spigot for your organization. And I hope that by the time we finish this afternoon, you'll have some insight into that. When I was first introduced to the organization, most of the folks we were dealing with were real estate experts, and I understand the demographics on this afternoon's group isn't all real estate people, but if you bought and sold a home, inherited in a shopping center, a farm, or anything else, you've been through the real estate. I'm sorry, I don't know how I'm moving that's causing that. So I'll just keep moving until I get out of the buzz. How about that? So, with that introduction, I want to move forward and give you a basic overview of where we're going to go. I'm going to talk about the charities that are in the country. We're going to go through the handouts. We're going to go through the tax implications and general rules that you'll have a working knowledge of. We're going to do a couple of case studies, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. And depending on how germane a particular question during my presentation is, I'm perfectly willing to stop and I can link it into the overall presentation. So if you've got what I call a burning bush item that you've come here and said, boy, if I could learn about this, I can go back and make a donation, and it's germane to a general type of gifting situation, I'll stop and talk about it. I love to talk about this stuff, so that's where we're going to go. We're going to deal with how donations impact the donors individually, what's the benefit to corporations when they give real estate, the generic problems with gifting of real estate, and some creative solutions that aren't normally used by even the largest of nonprofits, but normally used by those of us that are in the real estate industry for any period of time to solve something other than a straight cash sale of a piece of property. So let's first open up with some sort of an idea of really where wealth lies in the country. We've got cash and equivalents of about $8 trillion. These demographics are a little bit outdated, but we don't have anything up to date that's quite as crisp as this. You've got bonds that are another 11 trillion. You've got stocks at 12, and then you've got real estate, which matches all of it. 44% of the wealth in the United States is held in real estate. Charities every year get about $300 billion in donations. Only 2% of that comes in the form of real estate. Do you see a disconnect? The pool of the opportunity for donations is not being blocked by the donors, it's being blocked by the charities who don't understand how to use the mechanism safely to get at this 24 trillion. Within the next 25 years, the wealth transfer in the United States is going to be $60 trillion by aging Americans, not all of whom want to leave all their wealth directly to their children. They want to be philanthropists, they want to leave legacies, but the charities are holding their hands out and literally saying to 80% of all gifts offered to them, we don't want them, out of hand. That means that if $6 billion is coming in each year in successful gifts, they're turning away 24 billion with a B every year because of a number of things, and we'll talk about it. There are dangers to the charities, there's dangers to the donors, but we think that we've solved many of those problems. Here's the wealth breakdown, and then you've got commercial real estate basically at the top of the heap. Shopping centers, office buildings, farms that are used as income producing, and those sorts of things. Now, one of the things that we want to try and do for you is to distill this presentation and give it to you in a PowerPoint presentation so you can talk to local civic groups and other supporters so you can walk through sort of this litany with your own PowerPoint presentation with earmarking your own charity. So that's one of the things that we've been working on and making available to you. To give you the basis of the problems that charities face, this is the first one. On a straight donation, virtually 95% of the charities that I get involved with have a donor that wants to donate them a piece of property, and then the charity has to find a buyer to sell it to get the cash. That puts the charity in the chain of title with all the environmental issues, holding costs, staff time, everything else. And so that is a problem for charities, and they have historically rejected that 80% of all gifts that they've been offered because they don't want to be in the chain of title. They're not in the real estate business. But there is a tax court ruling, actually there are two, but the main one says that the charity doesn't have to go into title. If the donor and the charity enter into a contract for donation, which says that the charity can go find the buyer, and when they do, the donor deeds the property to the third-party buyer, the charity stays out of the chain of title. If they don't find a buyer, no problem. They don't have to take the gift. They buy time, and historically our transactions take, you're gonna love this spread, 9 days to 2 years. Yes. They can happen very, very quickly if there's a qualified buyer standing by and the donor wants to make a gift. The charity just has to step in, write a piece of paper, go to the title company and say, wire funds to our charity's account. It's that simple. And we'll talk about some of the ways you can go out and start asking for these kinds of gifts and do it. This process has revolutionized how major charities are considering taking real estate. Isn't this a nice, pretty little chart? This is called a bargain sale, and I need to give you these two basics before we move on with the taxation issues and everything else. Here you have a donor that's got a property worth $100,000. They owe $40,000 on it, and their equity of $60,000 is what they want to give to the charity. The normal way to do it would be the donor gives to the charity and the charity sells the property. Under most circumstances, in that case, the donor is going to pay capital gains on the $60,000 if they do that kind of step transaction. By contracting with the charity and the charity finding the buyer with direct deeding, the charity can use $40,000 of the buyer's money to pay off the mortgage at closing, and they pocket $60,000 for the gift. So, the sales price, I'm not talking about closing costs or anything else that's around it, but for the simplicity of the transaction, that is just the variation on the straight gifting scenario that I've got. And then you've got a number of implications to the donor and to the charity on the chart that you've been given. And we should go through some of those at this point. Let's take first the donor's side of the transaction. In any gift over $5,000 given to a charity, you have to have an appraisal. And the appraisal is what is used for the gifting deduction. And actually, I'm going to go back to this. I think I can go back. The donor has to get an appraisal. And if the donor's appraisal is challenged by the IRS, the amount of the gift can be rolled back. So that is a risk to the donor. Doesn't happen very often, but there are people that go to Aunt Sadie and say this wonderful $10,000 lot that we've got hidden in the hills of some small state that you can't get to but by helicopter, she says, oh, that's worth $1 million. And she writes up an appraisal and they submit it after the gift is completed, and they try to get $1 million deduction on a $10,000 piece of property. That probably isn't going to fly. But if you get a qualified appraiser and you attach it to the gifting forms that are used in the IRS, we've seen very few that have failed. It's got to be pretty abusive. So there's the IRS challenge, and there is no sunset time. If the IRS believes that there has been fraud, your gift is always open to be challenged. So the form that you have to follow is very important to complete a successful gift. The donor who might have had uranium spilled on their property by giving it to a charity doesn't get out of the chain of title for environmental impact issues. So they could always have the government or somebody else come back to them and say, you had a wonderful chicken farm, but we didn't know that you were refining uranium or copper smelting plant on this, and so you owe a few $100 million to remediate it. You can't give away something that's damaged thinking that you're going to get out of that kind of liability. There's something called heirs who sometimes get a little upset when Aunt Sadie and Uncle Fred give away a shopping center that's free and clear in downtown Las Vegas for $2 or $3 million, and they've been disinherited. For the sake of avoiding those kinds of lawsuits, it's a good idea to have the family involved in the gifting process so they can't claim that you've got undue influence, that you've taken advantage of their parents or their aunts or uncles or anything else. You just need to be aware of it. It's not a big issue, and you will learn to work your way through it. Of course, if you can't use the deduction, there's not much of a reason to give it away unless you're just totally philanthropic. The basic rules for tax gifting are that you get to use the amount of the gift deduction against 30% of your adjusted gross income as an individual. In other words, if you've got a $100,000 gift, to use it, you have to have at least $300,000, $322,700, whatever the number is, 30% of that adjusted gross income to use the full amount of your gifting deduction. But the IRS gives you a wonderful loophole. That is, you get a 5-year carry forward to use it. So you can use the gift deduction over a 6-year period against your adjusted gross income. Tremendous benefit, tremendous estate planning possibility. For corporations, the rule is that the corporation gets to use the amount of the gift deduction against 10% of their income in any given year with the same carry forward provisions. For corporate America in the United States, our last study indicated there was $175 billion in surplus corporate real estate presently on the books of the top 1,000 Wall Street companies. Top 1,000 companies have $175 billion that they recognize. And historically, corporations have been trying to give these properties to charities, but charities say, wait a minute, environmental issues, holding costs, how do we staff it, what are the problems? And this simple structure that I've shown you this afternoon avoids that. So in theory, if IBM wanted to give you a closed plant that they have in New Jersey, you could step forward and say, under the right conditions, IBM will take the property because it's a path to cash. Will you give us 90 days? Will you give us 6 months? Will you give us a year? And at least you're in the discussions. So those are the problems for the donor. Let's talk about what charities are generally concerned about, and that is obviously environmental issues. And the Boy Scouts of Chicago took a piece of vacant land that had an environmental impact problem with it, and it bankrupted them. And that was 15 years ago, and they're still talking about it. So charities that you will talk to in certain groups will always say, oh yeah, we know real estate, that's a big loser. Didn't you hear about the Boy Scouts that went broke on a gift that they took? If you're not entitled, you can't have an environmental issue. Then you have to have, if you own it as a charity, you need to have liability insurance because people stumbling across your property might get hurt. They'll sue you for that. There are holding costs. There's a great misconception that if a charity holds a piece of property, they don't pay property taxes. And that's not true. The only way a charity avoids property taxes is if they're using the property that they're holding for their own purposes. But if they have a shopping center, an apartment complex, or a ranch, they've got to pay property taxes on it. So it's a cost. For a residential property, you've got to have utilities turned on, you've got to have the yards taken care of, and charities don't have the money to expend for these sorts of things. So that's part of the reason that they've shied away from taking gifts. So you can see my whole risk factor here on where the charities are on my list, but we need to move on. I've talked about the 30% adjusted gross income tax issue for individuals. Corporations are at 10% of income. All of them get a 5-year carry forward. Subchapter S corporations, should they give a piece of real estate, they have to take the deduction at basis. They don't get a stepped up basis because subchapter S are dealt with differently than any other entity. And so we've done transactions where we've had to convert subchapter S over to C Corps and then make the donation. Just be aware, subchapter S are not allowed to take full appraisal value, fair market value for properties they give. We've talked about the carry forward rules. The appraisal rule basically is you've got to have somebody that is a professional appraiser that does it for a living, sign off on the appraisal, and commit to the IRS on a form that they are indeed full-time appraisers. They've looked at the property and they say that their appraisal for $100,000 is valid. That protects the donor. The charity never makes a representation as to the value of the property. All you say is, we'll take your property, you set up your own tax structure, you get your own appraisals. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about the higher standards and the threshold for taxation in estate planning, but there are people out there that do have estates considerably more than $3 million, and especially if they've got large 401k plans, company stock options, et cetera, et cetera. And if those people are not planning well at this point, they could actually throw their estate into a 70% tax bracket. For 401ks, they come out at alternative minimum tax rates, state taxation, and then the money goes to the estate and they're taxed at 55% of whatever's left over. So estate planning for wealthy individuals is a big deal. And it's a perfect place for a charity to come in and take some of their smaller properties, because the tax on estates are due very, very quickly. And let's say that you have a shopping center upon death that's worth $10 million, and you owe on it $6 million in estate taxation, and it takes you 6 or 7 months to sell it, and you sell it for $7 million. the estate really has netted $1 million out of a $10 million gift. If they will pull a charity in and do some planning, they can reduce that dramatically, and that's where all of you can benefit. I think that one of the normal questions that I get is, how do you start? And the real thing is, be prepared to take the real estate plunge and work through the process, but you've got to ask for it. Major charities in this country don't even ask for real estate. It's in their literature, but they cover their heads like this when somebody calls and says, got a ranch in Montana worth $5 million, will you take it? Well, why don't you sell it and pay the taxes and give us a gift? That does not land lightly on the ears of a really philanthropic donor, but I can assure you it happens every day in this country at this point. When I started in this niche market, I would go on the internet to find out who else was looking for real estate. I would have 3 or 4 postings at that point. Now you have lots of universities and large charities that are asking for it, but their narrow scope on how they can accept it never takes into consideration what I shared with you 10 minutes ago. It is, we'll take the house that we can see if we stand on the top stairs of our administrative building because we can see that property. That's it. Anything else is high finance to them, and they're not going to listen. Okay, now I saw 2 hands come up quickly, so I will, yes.
So if somebody gives you 1% of their estate, you have to be talking about the whole properties, don't you?
No, I mean you have an...
How do you realize the money out of it? Could you answer the question? Okay, the question is, if somebody's giving you 1% of an estate or 2% or whatever, how do you realize that in real cash to your charity?
The estate planning attorney will notify you you're one of the beneficiaries, wait for your money. No. When you get a call from the estate planning attorney, they're already dead. He's working through the assets. He's selling the real estate. He's selling the bonds. He's, it's just, you've now hit a home run.
Right on.
All right. So we've got an income. There are other ways to move, and that is adding income. I'm sorry. Yes.
Hi, I don't want to interrupt you, but I've got a subject here that's White Hart.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to speak more slowly. I'm from slow Albuquerque.
I'm sorry. What I'm thinking is probably on the minds of 90% of the people in this room. The White Hart project topic is foreclosures. Foreclosures in many areas are not selling, so they become REOs. I've been in the industry 32 years. I've already asked a lot of REO brokers that I buy property from, listen, I'm going to a seminar in New Mexico. It's on 501c3 corporations. Can you get some of these banks to donate me single family and multis in particular areas? They said probably. They're not selling stuff that was owed $300 on. They're letting go for $80,000 or $90,000. Wouldn't that be a real simple program? I even have a city I'm trying to get them to give me a 12-unit building to use for transitional housing that they've got 12 million in code violations on. That's decrepit, empty, and needs 300,000 in rehab. They were thrilled for me to call them.
I'm sure you, by the few minutes you've spent with me, my mind works in an outline, and what you've done is that you've just toggled 12 different things by saying what you've said. I'm going to try and distill it in what I think the question is. The question is, can you go to a bank and get them to give you REOs they've taken back and gifting components?
Directly, and then use grant money to rehab them and get fees to take care of the people.
I understand the game. Okay. The answer is that the banks that take back foreclosed properties are taking back assets that are not qualified for appreciated value when they give it because it's in their line of business. And ordinary income properties for developers, banks, and other people don't qualify for the higher appraised value. The only way a bank can benefit from what you're describing is that if it's in an enterprise zone, and they have to, under federal guidelines with the federal banking system, they have to give so much money each year. If you've got REOs in that market, the banks will listen to you. And it's where a bank has branches and they're servicing a community when the federal deposit, community redevelopment. They're redlined in every major city, and if a bank is there or they have REO in it, they can do exactly what this gentleman just said because it. because it is like cash to the bank. They're not looking for a $80,000 value that appraises at $300,000. They're looking at $80,000 in a bad loan on a piece of real estate that's going to cost them more money, and if they give it away, it's just like $80,000 in cash, and to most bankers, that goes ka-ching. There are other variations on the theme. There are gifts, there are bargain sales, and there are two other instruments. One's called a charitable remainder trust, where you give your property to a trust, they sell it, you get income for life, and when you die, the charity gets the residual, the corpus of the trust. That and charitable gift annuities, where you exchange your property for a lifetime income guaranteed by the charity, are what senior citizens are looking for to stabilize their incomes across the country. They're frightened of certain kind of pension plans, Social Security, and everything else, and the assets that they've got, like their home or a resort property or something else, can be converted into lifetime income streams, and they get a tax deduction from it also for a good portion of it. So they're using it to supplement their retirement incomes. We don't have enough time to really delve into charitable remainder trust and gift annuities, but you need to hear it, and we can talk about it at a later time. Here are the tax savings. That by giving a property away, you avoid capital gains, you avoid income tax in most cases, and you avoid inheritance taxes. We've touched on some of those issues to move along on. You're providing the social capital aspect and legacy is a big giving aspect to fundraising, and the reason that people give 1%, 10%, or whatever, they're leaving something without disinheriting their family. And many wealthy people have already felt that they've spoiled their kids and their grandkids and everybody else, so why not spread around some of the wealth and put their name on a building and do something else? By giving it away, quite often they can save money from their heirs, so it's not mutually exclusive. So think in terms of these moves that you're asking for people to give you real estate and other assets actually might better position the heirs to have liquidity and things they can sell to pay inheritance taxes, to get the money quicker, and those sorts of things. The life insurance companies are really boiling in on this whole area. And if you have a property you give away that produces an income stream, you've got a way to pay for a wealth replacement life insurance policy that really helps your heirs more than giving them the property. Whole nother subject. There are so many different avenues and so many different alleys that you could run down in this area. It is gigantic, and we think we've only covered a few of it, but I'm trying to keep it simple, if you can believe that. Case study. This is an example of somebody that had, we haven't talked about donor advised funds, but that's what this is. You can give property to, to certain organizations. They'll manage your money in perpetuity. You, your grandchildren, and everything else can tell them where you want the money to be given each year, and it's called a donor advised fund. We had a donor that had an orange grove in California worth $10 million, and they wanted to give 10% of it to a donor advised fund, or $1 million. They called us on the 1st of December, and the gift had to be completed by the end of the year. That is really scrambling, but we were able to accomplish it, and we funded a $1 million donor advised fund, and the benefit for the financial advisor is he kept managing not only the $9 million that he got from partial sale, but also this $1 million, and since it's in perpetuity, he could really figure in percentages how long his life as a financial advisor might go at 1.5% or 2% a year on $1 million for 2 years, 20 years, give it to his kid to manage, 30 years, 40 years, because this is like a corporation. It goes on in perpetuity. Financial managers are good places for you to go and talk about gifting for their wealthy clients. And the caveat, or really the carrot that you should give them, is you'll allow them once the fund is fully vested, that they'll continue to manage the money. So it's a no-lose situation for them. If the people die, the money's gone, it goes to their heirs, and they lose a contract. But if you go to a financial advisor and talk about this, it's a good opportunity for you to have somebody that's talking about your charity, and when somebody comes in and says, you know, you need some financial incentive to move along. We have a charity that's particularly good in real estate in our area. Why don't we talk to them? Oh, you can go to their website, you can look at their mission statement, and that sort of thing, so you feel comfortable that they are who they say they are. Okay, so I've talked about that. I want to do another quick one. Another basic case study, we just completed it. A man who owned like 54 fast food operations. He would buy more land than he needed, and then he would put his operation on a portion of it, and he had all these outlying pieces of property around. We just completed a $100,000 gift on something he was just throwing into his estate, and if he died with it, he would pay $70,000 in taxes on a very illiquid piece of property. So he had a reason to go out quickly. So in any of the areas that you live where there are privately held fast food or other sorts of multiple ownership of sites for franchises, it's a good place to go and talk to that owner about thinking about giving you out pieces of property as a gift. 100,000 free and clear, no hits, no runs, no errors, took 28 days. We haven't sold it yet. The charity that we put it with had no problem in taking title. They don't always listen to me. I give them the advice and they go on down the road the way they want to. Let's talk about some of the creative ways to get out of a property that you're donating. First of all, everybody would love to run to cash, but right now cash and financing is a big problem virtually for any kind of property. Another rule, a property that is appraised for $100,000 that can't sell for whatever reason, but a fair market value appraisal of $100,000, there's no prohibition from you, the charity, selling it for $70,000, $60,000, $50,000, $30,000, $10,000. It's not an interconnected activity. The donor, if they've got a valid appraisal, probably will not be challenged. And if you've got control of selling the property as the charity, the donor has no say-so. They say, we want to give you this, and you'd say, we need 30 days to sell it. You can't sell it for 100, you sell it for 70, no problem. And you have to file a report when you sell the property, but that's a whole nother issue. So cash for appraised value is not where you're going. You're going to do as many transactions as you possibly can and not get hung up on you've got an appraisal for $100,000. Most of the major charities who have gotten into trouble have boards that look at appraisals for properties that are $2 or $3 million. Let's say it's $2 million, and their offer is $1,950,000. They think they're losing $50,000, and they reject it. The next offer comes in at $1.8 million, then $1.2 million, then $800,000, and everybody's standing around saying, we've got a $2 million appraisal. Why should we sell it for any less? Well, they're going to wait a long time to get cash with that kind of attitude. So stay flexible. Stay very flexible. And that leads to, why not carry your own financing on the property? Take a reasonable down payment, structure the financing, and carry it. You're going to get a lot more buyers than asking for cash, no matter what the price is. Use your property to do 1031 exchanges. After this seminar, each one of you should be out in the marketplace trying to buy your own office building, either with a bargain sale or exchanging something into it with a gifted property to start using the property that you normally pay rent for and that sort of thing. We're giving you the tools to do that. So 1031 exchanging to exchange out of a property you've been given. Let's say it's $1 million shopping center. You can take a $200,000 house and $800,000 in cash and move on down. It's easier to sell something worth $200,000 than $1 million. You can also carry $800,000 and take a trade down. Those are things that we in the commercial and investment real estate do all the time. It's not unusual. Those are the kinds of folks you need to snuggle up to in your marketplace also and start getting them involved so they understand that you're going to be a wonderful client over the years to come. If you get a piece of vacant land, there's no reason you can't put the land up with a local builder to go ahead and build out something and be a joint venture. Sell it to the builder when it's leased up, or you sell it to an outside investor and that sort of thing. So those are some of the ways that you might get through a property that you wouldn't otherwise know. Here are some of the costs for a charity to hold a property should they go into title. Staff time. Charities are not set up to be real estate tycoons. They have to name somebody like Helen up in accounting to go out and look at the apartment complex and collect the rent and make sure the lawn's cleaned. And while she's doing that, she's not doing the books and sending out the letters and doing other sorts of things. Yes, she may hire property management to do that, but she still has to oversee it until the property's sold. So that's a hidden expense to the charity. Maintenance. Where do they get the money to go put in a new boiler, put in a new air conditioning unit? They simply don't have the money to do that sort of thing. If they invest the money and they've had it, they lose investment opportunity that the money could be earning interest while they're off taking care of a piece of property. All this is avoided by direct deeding. So that's another reason to go out of these properties. We've talked about environmental impact problems. Oh, I actually know of a facilitating charity that specializes in taking title to environmentally impacted properties on behalf of other charities and then sharing with them the proceeds after remediation. They've got insurance companies, engineering firms, and everything else. So if you run across an environmentally impacted property, don't just toss it out immediately. There are places to go in the country now to solve that problem. You get a aspiring young violinist riding her bicycle across your property, and she breaks her arm and can no longer be a violinist, and somebody projects her lifetime income was going to be $50 million. You can't insure over that kind of loss. So another risk factor that you have to consider. We're all going in all of our communities, down zoning, side zoning, no zoning, nobody to talk to. You get a piece of property and you decide to hold it because you're going to speculate on it, the zoning could change on you. There could be utility moratoriums like they had in Colorado Springs 15 years ago. They didn't stop anything. You just couldn't get a fire plug or an electrical meter or anything else. They didn't have any in storage, so they was effectively blocking any sort of growth effort. So that can happen. You know, real estate only goes up. So I don't understand how this ever made it onto my chart. I guess it was a typo or something. For your clients and your charity, really nurture the real estate community because they don't understand that nonprofit doesn't mean no cash. They equate nonprofits with not wanting to pay them to volunteer for all their services rather than going out and making a commission. I encourage all boards that I deal with, pay a full recognizable commission. You can pay consulting fees to help evaluate the property that you could pay the realtor. You can give them performance bonuses. You can also explain to them as they're going out in their community to list properties, you as their client, the charity, give them a listing advantage because as they're talking to older Americans about different kinds of ways to sell their property, interject with maybe a simple flyer that you'll give them. Have you ever thought about donating your property? You could make a straight gift. We could give you some of it in cash and do a bargain sale. We could establish a trust for you. We can do all these things. So the real estate agent who goes out and uses the normal 5 listing approaches, you've given them number 6 and given them an advantage in the community to go out and get a listing. So I would suggest that you give them a listing advantage. And it doesn't hurt to get 5 or 6 different types of realtors to come to your charity, see what you're doing, get them enthusiastic about it. You'll have leasing agents, you'll have commercial brokers, investment brokers, industrial brokers, residential brokers, farm brokers. Get one of each. Bring them in and do a little seminar and say, look, here's what, the market's not so good out here. Have you thought about asking your clients for gifting opportunities? And the biggest thing is, everybody in this room should believe you are going to be a multi-million-dollar charity. I don't think you travel from around the country here to write grants and everything else. Real estate flowing in along with grants, straight gifts, 1%, donations from estates. You become a giant client for the realtors in your community, and they ought to start wooing you after you tell them what you're able to do for them and bring clients in to talk to them. And for realtors, it's a public exposure for taking out an ad, a half-page ad saying, Lily Smith just closed on a donation that generated $500,000 for our charity. Isn't she a wonderful broker? She can't pay for that. But that's what you can give back to her in a way of public exposure. And if your brokers are finding that the property being donated to you isn't in Bangor, Maine, where they're located, it's in Seattle, Washington, they can get referral fees. So there is a lot of reasons for realtors to jump in, and I can tell you I've talked myself hoarse with CCIMs, SIORs, CREs, and everybody else, and they just go absolutely flat because they don't understand the potential that the nonprofit world brings to the real estate community. That is a message you need to take out to them. We need to be able to help you do that, but you need to be the foot soldiers out there to develop your program.
So is this a good slide to capture so you can create that interest with realtors?
Great slide. I wish I'd have had that 15 years ago. I wish I'd have had it 2 years ago. Well, we can provide this. We can provide this PowerPoint to you, so you don't need to take notes. You can, you can put it on your letterhead. You can do whatever you want to do with it. We're a team. Suggestions for how to find properties. We've talked about realtors. You've got to ask people who have shown an interest in your charity. Just ask them if they would consider giving real estate. They may not have property, but relatives might have it, and they'd say, my aunt just inherited a 40% interest in a shopping center in North Carolina, and she's in Chicago, and that doesn't match. You can take percentage interest in properties that are given to people who are interested in your charity and their family. So you have to start, number one, you have to ask. Number two, we have a site down here. It's not very good. It's ncpg.org. That is the national website location for the National Council on Planned Giving. They meet in every state. Every state has a planned giving council, and you ought to be attending it just to hear the things that they're talking about.